Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Garodnick, Chair of the City Planning Commission and Director of the Department of City Planning. Welcome to today's public meeting of April 3rd, 2024. We'll begin today with 3 votes, all of them for city agency applications. Our first item comes from the Department of Small Business Services to create the Cypress Hills Fulton Street Business Improvement District in Brooklyn. If approved, the bid would cover 325 businesses in the neighborhood. Next up, we'll vote on a Department of Transportation application for a site selection and acquisition of 4725 34th Street in Long Island City. This loft building would be used by around 340 DOT staff members, including sidewalk and concrete inspectors, traffic operations, automated enforcement, and traffic operations fiber optic electricians. Our final vote for today is regarding another bid, this one in Queens. This application by the City Department of Small Business Services on behalf of the Long Island City bid would modify the existing plan and expand the bid in community districts 1 and 2 in Queens. On to our public hearings today. First up is a proposal from the Department of Citywide Administrative Services to dispose of 4 city-owned properties in Douglaston, Little Neck, Queens. These sites are mainly very small, undevelopable lots. Heading to Brooklyn, the public is invited to testify on the Red Hook Coastal Resiliency Plan, proposed by the Department of Design and Construction, Department of Transportation, Department of Citywide Administrative Services, and Department of Parks and Recreation. With funding from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, this significant initiative ties together natural topographic high points and a variety of design elements like roller gates and flood walls to provide protection from sea level rise and future storms for the entire neighborhood. It also includes a major expansion to the Brooklyn Waterfront Greenway. This week, we also have a couple of continuations of public hearings that we started in late March. First is the Department of Finance proposal to acquire space for active storage and transportation of records and repair and refurbishment of furniture at 850 3rd Avenue in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. This site would be occupied by half a dozen city employees. Next and last for today, an application from the Department of Transportation for a major concession in Times Square, which would allow the city, through the Times Square Alliance, to expand concessions from the existing bow tie further north and south along Broadway. Because the concession area is above a certain threshold of square footage, this application must go through public review. So, Madam Secretary, with that, let's get started.
Good morning. This is the City Planning Commission public meeting held remotely through the NYC Engage portal and in person in the CPC hearing room 120 Broadway, Lower Concourse. Today is Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024. I will now call the roll. Chair Garodnick.
Here.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Here.
Commissioner Benjamin. Present. Commissioner Cerullo.
Here.
Commissioner Crowell.
Present.
Commissioner Dueck.
Here.
Commissioner Gold.
Here.
Commissioner Goodrich is absent. Commissioner Kamani. Here. Commissioner Mudden.
Here.
Commissioner Osorio.
Here.
Commissioner Ramprashad.
Here.
A quorum is present. The first item is the approval of the minutes of the public meeting of Wednesday, March 20th, 2024.
Great. On the minutes, I make a motion to approve the minutes of Wednesday, March 20, 2024. Commissioner Ramprashad has seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Minutes are approved.
Scheduling calendar numbers 1 through 4. We have resolutions for adoption scheduling Wednesday, April 17th, 2024 for a public hearing to be held in person in the CPC hearing room 120 Broadway and remotely through the NYC Engage portal.
Great. On the resolutions, I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Been seconded by the Vice Chairman. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Resolution's adopted.
The next part of the calendar is the report section on page 6. Borough of Brooklyn, calendar number 5, Cypress Hills Fulton bid formation, CD5 and 240266BDK, and the matter of an application for a business improvement district concerning Cypress Hills Fulton bid formation. For a favorable report on calendar number 5, Chair Garodnick.
Aye.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Benjamin.
Aye.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Crowell.
Yes.
Commissioner Dueck.
Yes.
Commissioner Gold.
Yes.
Commissioner Kamani. Yes. Commissioner Mudden.
Yes.
Commissioner Osorio.
Yes.
Commissioner Ramprashad.
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 5. Borough of Queens, calendar number 6, 4725 34th Street site selection and acquisition, CD2, C230367PCQ in the matter of an application for a site selection and acquisition concerning 4725 34th Street. For a favorable report on calendar number 6, Chair Grodnick.
Aye.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Benjamin.
Aye.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Crowell.
Yes.
Commissioner Doak.
Yes.
Commissioner Gold.
Yes.
Commissioner Kamani.
Yes.
Commissioner Medin.
Yes.
Commissioner Osorio.
Yes.
Commissioner Ramprashad.
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 6. Borough of Queens, calendar number 7, Long Island City bid expansion, CDs 1 and 2, N240267BDQ, and the matter of an application for a business improvement district expansion concerning Long Island City bid expansion. For a favorable report on calendar number 7, Chair Grodnick.
Aye.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Benjamin.
Aye.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Crowell.
Yes.
Commissioner Doak.
Yes.
Commissioner Gold.
Yes.
Commissioner Kamani.
Yes.
Commissioner Medin.
Yes.
Commissioner Osorio.
Yes.
Commissioner Ramprashad.
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 7. The next part of the calendar is the public hearing section on page 8.
Great. Thank you. And before we get started with that, I'll just remind members of the public that we will limit remarks to 3 minutes. And let's get right on into the public hearings. Madam Secretary, let's call the first item.
Borough of Queens, calendar number 8, DCAS disposition sites CD11. CD11 C240189 PPQ, public hearing in the matter of an application for disposition of city-owned properties concerning DCAS disposition sites CD11.
Great. On behalf of DCAS, the applicant, we have via Zoom Kyle Daniels, Chris Grove, and Alex Kriskowski. Whenever you are promoted and ready, we'll look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Alex Kriskowski. I'm a planner at DCAS, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, Kyle Daniels and Chris Grove, and we are presenting the 4 sites for disposition in Queens CD11. Next slide, please. So these 4 lots are, they're slivers, they're not developable in their own right. And because there was interest in one of the 4 properties, we did some research into other lots in the community district, which would also fit the sail away criteria, and which were also eligible for disposition. And we are seeking disposition approval to give us the flexibility to sell them in the future. Next slide, please. Just a quick zoning map. These lots are primarily in residentially zoned areas, with the exception of block 8260, lot 226, which is residentially zoned, but in a commercial overlay. Next slide, please. So the first, I'm just going to quickly run through, with the time that we have, the 4 lots. So we have block 8136, lot 74. It's a 1 foot wide, 207 square foot lot, roughly corresponding with this this retaining wall in concrete here that you're seeing in picture 2. It's kind of nestled between these residential lots. Next slide, please. So we're looking at a lot on the same block, lot 129, adjacent to lot 74. You can kind of see it in the corner here in the map. This lot separates, it sort of bifurcates 41st Road, the 41st Road right-of-way. To the north, 41st Road is a mapped built street, and to the south, 41st Road is mapped and unbuilt, and is these private lots occupy where 41st Road once was. So if we end up getting disposition approval for this site, we will end up reapportioning it to keep the part that is within 41st Road within city ownership. Next slide, please. Now we have 8185, lot 58. This is a triangularly shaped lot, overlapping roughly with the edge of this driveway here, with this this wall that you're seeing. And it is adjacent to former right-of-way of Rushmore Ave, a bit to the, maybe 100 feet or so to the northeast. You have a path where Rushmore Ave, where 244th Street. Continue. Okay. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Alex. You hit your time, but I'm going to ask you to tell us about the fourth site.
Okay. Can we pull up the next slide so I can talk about it? Thank you.
There you go.
So just real quick, this is a 8-foot wide lot adjacent to Il Bacco in Queens. It corresponds with part of this driveway here that gives vehicular access to all of these buildings surrounding this parking lot. This is important because there is a historical easement on this lot which prohibits development on it that would obstruct the driveway in any way. So this easement exists in perpetuity. So if and when we are able to dispose of this lot, the purchaser would not be able to build anything on it that would obstruct the driveway, meaning really not anything at ground level, realistically. And I think that's all I have to share. Thank you.
Great. Okay, terrific. Well, I only have a couple of very quick questions, and these are small and unusual lots, which would be very difficult for the city to do much with. We certainly understand the application here. My only questions are, one, presumably the most likely possible acquirers of this are the adjacent property owners, right? This is not something that you would see as a possible disposition more broadly than that, I'm guessing.
So not only are they the most likely acquirers, they are the only possible acquirers under sale away. So when when lots are eligible for sale away, we reach out to all of the abutters, and they are the only eligible purchasers. And whoever ends up purchasing the lots are among those who are interested from that small pool of property owners. So it can really only be used to append an existing lot, in a sense.
Thank you. What was you said only possible under a particular provision?
So yes.
I'm sorry. Okay, I misheard you.
So this is different from our auction process. So this is separate from the DCAS auction process, whereby the highest bidder is sold the lot. In this instance, we reach out to all the abutters, and whichever adjacent owner responds with interest first and is willing to buy the property ends up buying the property.
If I may just add, if I just may add, what sale away is that it allows DCAS to make direct sales, and we were able to get that legislation approved. And what sale away stands for, it's an acronym, and it stands for slivers, access ways, interior lots. So this is the exception where we can make direct sales. Otherwise, we have to sell our properties through or dispose of them through public auction. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Got it. That makes sense. And just this was my second question, which is, in a context like that, how do you determine the fair market value for such a sale, and to make sure that the city is getting what it deserves out of that transaction?
We run appraisals as part of this process. As part of once ULURP approval is obtained, our appraisals team will determine the fair market value for these lots.
Okay, got it. Thank you. We go to Commissioner Dweck.
Thank you, Chair. You touched on my question, which was how was the price determined. But speaking to the appraisal process, is that based on the potential value of the land as is, or is it what is accretive to the current owner who abuts it and what they will have the potential to then do with that land? How is the process determined? Is it based on the actual development of that sliver lot, which would be nil, or is it based on what the added value to the owner would be, is my question.
I believe it's as is. And in all of these cases, because of zoning, there really isn't any development potential that is opened up by any of these lots in particular. So in this case, those values wouldn't be different.
If I may just add, the appraisers, which are DCAS appraisers, they do take in consideration, the adjacent lot, and if it was combined, they do that. So if there are, if there are rights, meaning development rights, and in regards to what other things can be done, they do take into consideration that they do to adjacent.
Right. So, for example,
lots.
on the Il Buco spot, it's 1,600 square feet, which would, in the R3, I'm not sure, will allow them to build several hundred more square feet on top of their existing building. Should they not max out on the height? So you're saying that they're going to take that into consideration?
Well, I believe separately. I believe that the building already maxes out on height. If it's not already, it is either very close to maxing out or is already maxed out on height. So the potential for that development is pretty small. And like I mentioned before, the potential for outward development to the north, going into the lot, into the sliver lot, is it's zero because of the easement that exists on the Il Buco lot. So there's no, it does not open up lateral development either.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Benjamin?
Is this the successor to the AHOP program that DCAS used to, or is there still an AHOP program also?
Chris or Kyle, would you be able to answer this?
Sure. Yeah, the AHOP is no longer, and yeah, I think this is widely perceived internally as a successor program.
And it's available not just for commercial, but for residential and manufacturing properties that have these characteristics of small lots, or?
Yeah, any lot that is undevelopable on its own and has ULURP disposition approval may be included within this program, regardless of zone.
Not just sliver lots.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
And my second response is that it's the appraisal is required by the charter, irrespective of how the disposition happens. Within 6 months of the disposition, an appraisal has to be done. Generally, the appraisal is done by 2 methods. And the city can, I don't know that there's ever been a vast difference between the 2 methods, but there are generally 2 methods that are chosen, and they look at each one and the price.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rampersad?
Thank you for the presentation. I just had a quick question. I'm just trying to understand the process. When you say you reach out to the adjacent neighbors, can you walk us through? Do you send register mail? How much time does that neighbor have to reply to you before, I guess, it goes on auction? Can you just walk me through it briefly? So
there isn't, to be clear, there isn't a time past which this process goes to auction. So it's the way Sailaway works is not, there isn't a time limit by which we have to sell these properties. This merely gives us the flexibility to sell them if we have an interested buyer. And obviously the only interested buyers that would be relevant are the abutters. So we would mail the abutters, explaining the process to them, gauge their interest, and in the instance where none of the abutters are interested, it's a dormant process. And if, for example, a successor to one of the abutters becomes interested in purchasing the lot years down the road, we still have that ULURP flexibility to dispose of the property. But so it's not a situation where it needs to be sold within a certain number of months, and it will be sold at auction if a direct sale is not successful. It would stay in our portfolio.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, great. I don't see any more questions for you from the panel here, and I do not see members of the public wishing to testify on this item, but I'm going to just confirm that for a moment. Okay, that is correct. With that, I will close the hearing on calendar number 8, and thank you all, DCAS friends, for being with us today, and we will move on to the next item of the day.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
For Brooklyn, calendar numbers 9 and 10, Red Hook Coastal Resiliency, CD6, calendar number 9, C240035 MMK, calendar number 10, one second, calendar number 10, C240036PQK, public hearing in the matter of an application for a city map amendment and acquisition concerning Red Hook Coastal Resiliency.
Great, and on behalf of the applicant team, we have today Eric Ilajevich, Matthew Nayer, and Joseph Menzer. Welcome to you all. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Chair Garodnick, and thank you, Commissioners. Good morning. Our agenda includes the following. We'll just dive right in. We'll have a brief overview and schedule. We'll look at the existing conditions and risk of coastal flood surge. We'll recap the design process and review. We'll take a closer look at the ULURP land actions or land use actions, and then we'll sum everything up and look at next steps. So let's review the goals of the project and look at the schedule. The Red Hook Coastal Resilience Project provides for or addresses the following. We passively provide coastal flood surge protection to the area to elevation 8 feet, and we do that by constructing flood walls, raising street grades, and other infrastructure improvements, which tie into existing grades at higher ground. And additionally, the project includes deployable feature, also known as floodgates, to increase protection to elevation 10 feet. And this protection addresses the 10% chance yearly occurrence coastal storm, while also accounting for 30 inches of sea level rise and 6 inches of freeboard. And this accounts for protection of 99.9% of all historic coastal floods or coastal storms, as well as future sea level rise. We also minimize impacts to access, including to pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles. And we maintain connectivity in the community and access to the active waterfront. We also provide enhancements to the Brooklyn Waterfront Greenway, or BWG, and we reduced flood impacts to existing drainage. Here's the schedule, and we'll just go from top to bottom. PDC review and approval will be coordinated as we finalize the design, and we're aiming for this spring. The public review of the environmental assessment is complete, and FEMA will address the comments received during the comment period that's happening right now. Just a reminder about FEMA and our HMGP funding, or Hazard Mitigation Grant Program funding. The requirements for that, we have to demonstrate feasibility, constructability, that it can be implemented and deployed, that's environmentally acceptable and cost effective. We have to have a benefit cost ratio of 1 or greater. We are now in the ULURP process, here we are, and which is what brings us here today, and through August of this year. Design completion is imminent with 100% design draft review beginning at the end of next month. And I just also wanted to remind folks, this is an overview of the robust community engagement that we've had throughout the life of the Red Hook Coastal Resiliency Project. Just again, a reminder that we've been engaged with everyone at every step along the way. And now we'll just turn it over to Joe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to go through a little bit about the project intent, some of the design of the project, and then a little bit about the ULURP process as well.
Can you speak up just a little bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Red Hook is characterized by an industrial waterfront and a residential core. The black line on the map here represents the generalized flood protection alignment, and it sort of bifurcates those two areas. There's a band of mixed-use space between these two areas that varies from one-story warehouses to six-story multifamily homes. Within this mixed-use space, the land use varies from light manufacturing to artist studios, restaurants, and other businesses. It is interesting to note that Red Hook has a population of about 11,000 people, 70% of whom live within the Red Hook houses, which is development in the center of Red Hook and consists of 24 large buildings. It's also an important note, and this made a difference in our flood protection system, is that the vast majority of the waterfront is privately owned, with a few public waterfront access points such as Valentino Pier Park. That fact, as I mentioned, was a key driver for the alignment of the flood protection system. Much of the neighborhood here shown is in blue and green. It is in the 1% annual chance of flood hazard, or the 100-year floodplain. And that's to say that every year there's a 1% chance that 1% chance that a 100-year flood will actually happen. The 100-year flood elevation varies from 13 feet along the coast, which is zone AE, to 10 foot in the interior, which is zone VE. All new construction along the waterfront, like IKEA and Amazon distribution centers, have all been built with first floor elevations of 13 foot or higher to address this. For reference, the existing street elevations within the rest of Red Hook within the neighborhood are generally range from 4 to 8 feet. The areas in orange are in the 0.2% or the 500-year floodplain and have a much lower risk of flooding due to the natural topography and the elevation that is above elevation 10. I do want to call your attention to the multiple references to elevation 10 because it becomes an important marker as we develop the flood protection system for the neighborhood. So now we'll take a little bit of a quick review of the design itself. At a high level, the flood protection system is made up of two independent systems, one in the Atlantic Basin area of Red Hook and one along the coastline of Beer Street. Both alignments incorporate a flood protection system at elevation 10. The section between them is already above elevation 10. And on the far east, the existing grades are already above elevation 10 as well. This includes Red Hook Park and Court Street continuing up towards the highway. With all these sections working together, we have created a continuous flood protection system at elevation 10 for the neighborhood. This map shows in a little bit more detail the breakdown of the various components of the flood protection system. The light blue throughout the corridors are the streets being reconstructed and regraded. Some of these areas are being raised and others are being regraded for interior drainage improvements. The dark blue line is the extent of the permanent concrete flood wall. The orange and yellow nodes are the deployable gates that allow the system to achieve a flood protection elevation of 10. And the purple areas are independent flood protection components around critical areas outside of the public right-of-way. The following provides a little bit more clarity into the major flood protection system components. The flood walls max out at 4 to 5 feet high and have an architectural wavy finish, very similar to the flood walls on Esker, if you're familiar with that project, Eastside Coastal Resiliency. The flip gates are an alloyed aluminum with a concrete finish, so they look just like sidewalk when they lay flat, and are hydraulically deployed with a push of a button. And there are two roller gates, and they are constructed of gray painted steel with a decorative finish and round corners. All the design work is subject to the Public Design Commission review and approval. We obtained preliminary review back in 2022. Okay, so a little bit about the land actions that are required to make this all happen. There are a number of proposed changes to the existing city map, highlighted on this plan in yellow. Changes to legal street grades. These are areas where we are raising the elevation of the streets. Mapping of Sullivan Street, west of Ferris Street. This is an existing roadbed that is open and in use, but is not formally mapped to the City of New York. And then mapping new parkland to enlarge Todd Triangle. This is a mapping of some existing New York City DOT right-of-way to be New York City Parks property for the expanded plaza on Columbia Street. So in addition to the mapping actions, there's also a need for for acquisitions for the flood protection system. The proposed flood protection system will be developed primarily on city and state-owned property within the public right-of-way. However, since some of the flood walls are adjacent to private property, acquisitions of permanent easements are required by the city as directed by FEMA for operations, inspections, and maintenance of the flood protection elements. The city will seek easements roughly 15 feet wide adjacent to each flood wall and gate. All the existing structures, businesses, or homes subject to this acquisition action are proposed to remain. This slide and the next show all the actions in a bit more detail. We won't take the time to go through them all right now, but the presentation will be made available so you can review these actions at your leisure. These are required actions within the Atlantic Basin area. And these are the actions within the Beer Street area. This is the combination of both the mapping actions and the acquisition actions. Looking forward, the EA and the ULIP are on independent tracks. As Eric mentioned, the EA has now been completed. The draft FONSI was issued, and this is a comment period pending, and that will hopefully wrap up on 4/10 when the final FONSI will be issued. With regard to the ULIP process, we're presenting today here at the City Planning Commission, after which there's a 60-day review and comment period before moving on to the City Council, and we're hoping to wrap this up sometime this summer. And with that, I just turn it over to any questions.
Great, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for this. This is a very important project, and we all remember what happened in this area in the context of Superstorm Sandy and the Red Hook houses, and so this is important work, and we appreciate your extensive efforts to make this possible. I have just one specific about the land use, and then just a couple of more general questions. The land use question is, it's a practical matter. The mapping actions here of Sullivan Street or any other street which is already functioning as a street but not yet on the city map, what is that specifically enabling you to do here?
So it just gives the city authority for maintenance of those streets in the future, legally, be able to be on the streets, maintain them, and keep them updated.
And when you noted that a lot of this was on or near private property, certainly in a residential area, in contrast to other precedent where this has been done, what specific challenges has that presented here that have been distinct from the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, for example, or anything else that might be a reasonable analog?
So the largest challenge here is the project had to stay within the New York City DOT right-of-way, or when I say state-owned property, we do have some interventions on the Port Authority property that's within Atlantic Basin. And keeping everything within those parameters made it very difficult to seek much higher elevations for protection. Made it more difficult to seek higher elevations for protection because of the impact to the adjacent properties. Esker is not necessarily similar in the respect that it's along the waterfront and they're basically reconstructing the entire park, which is separated from the city, provides a buffer zone in essence for a good chunk of the area. A similar project, or not similar in some scope, would be work that's being done in Broad Channel in Queens, New York. In that area as well, we're raising roadways along a number of streets in Broad Channel, and those roads are very narrow and adjacent to hundreds of residential homes. And so again, making sure that folks can enter their homes, enter their driveways into the project, limited the amount that you could actually raise the roadways to.
Okay, and then the last question from me is really a practical one. You noted that some of the changes in the event of an emergency would be either flip-up gates or sliding gates. Some of them deployed hydraulically, some of them deployed manually.
They're all deployed either hydraulically or by some mechanical means.
None manual.
None. They can be if something was to happen, but they are meant to deploy via some mechanical.
I see. And it's really just a practical question of interest here for me.
Sure.
From where does one turn the dial to make that hydraulic gate move?
Sure, it is local. You do have to go to the site. It's not from some center, another part of the city.
So then my question here is, in the event of either a failure to deploy or flip-up gate or rolling gate, or the need, the even stated need of somebody to be there to make it happen, what agency has the responsibility for handling that in the future here, East Side Coastal Resiliency elsewhere, in the event of a coming anticipated event?
So the decision to deploy is handled by EM, Emergency Management, and they'll decide, and they will deploy in the event about 72 hours prior to an actual event. So there's plenty of time to go there, deploy the gates, and if something was to fail, there's plenty of time to deploy them manually as well. The deployment agency in the past was New York City DOT, and that is now being switched to New York City DEP. They just created a new division within DEP that will be in charge of deploying these systems.
Okay, so OEM makes the call. DEP newly is the agency that would be responsible for closing the gates and handling any issues that present. Okay, correct. Thank you. Commissioner Benjamin.
Hi, thank you very much.
Sure.
For the presentation. I had a few questions. The first is about the changes in grade. Will they necessitate any changes in the infrastructure that are underneath those streets?
They will. We are replacing some sewer and some water mains, and part of that is because of the additional load that's added to those systems because we're burying them deeper. So we have to upgrade some of them.
And that is funded in the capital budget, or is it funded as part of the FEMA effort?
It's from the part of the capital budget, not as FEMA's effort.
And is it fully funded?
My knowledge, it is.
Somebody behind you is saying yes. And that's and for the other types of infrastructure that are not under the city's control, let's say the electric lines or the cable television lines, are those also being relocated in the change in grades?
They are. Yep. We've coordinated the project through an alignment and joint bid process with the various agencies. So Con Ed and
Verizon.
Right,
so there's already been a mapping conference, or?
There has already been multiple meetings with them, so they understand what needs to be removed, relocated, changed as part of this project.
And they're on the same schedule as you?
We hope so.
Well, the only reason I say that is because, there have been times when the schedule is different and one part of the city comes in and does work of that type, and then the street is regraded and we're all happy. And then the next agency comes in, rips up the same street and does their part of it. So just trying to make sure that the residents and users of Red Hook streets will have a continuous construction period of the shortest time possible.
So that's correct. So what will end up happening here is that the private utilities will use the exact same contractor that the city ends up retaining to do the work for the public work.
Great idea.
Yeah, so they'll do everything at the same time.
And as for is the grade and level of the outfalls changing? Do all of these outfalls have gates?
So many of the outfalls do not have gates, and they're being added as part of this project.
So that's not on the screen, but it is happening.
Correct. We didn't show all that detail on the screen, but that's correct. There are tie gates being added to a number of gates within the system.
And that's also funded in the capital budget?
That's correct.
And everybody's happy?
Everything within the
DEP is happy? Want to make sure DEP is happy?
I won't comment on DEP.
Oh, I used to work for them, so I'm sure you think they're great. There's two more questions. One is, since this is being designed for the flood, not the surge, You know, in Superstorm Sandy, part of the problem was the surge. So how is that being accounted for in what these floodgates can handle?
Is it possible to bring back up the presentation? There was a couple of additional slides. Oh, can I do it here? I'm sorry, I didn't see it on the screen. I apologize. So there's an interesting slide that might help. So you can see Hurricane Sandy. There are two circled dots on the right-hand side of the screen here. Those are the elevations of the sea water when it reached Red Hook, right? The elevations that were achieved. So our level of protection is elevation 10, and that's that dark orange line you see going across the top of the screen.
Right.
So other than the 1 day of Sandy, the flood protection that is proposed for Red Hook will handle, or will be able to handle any of the historical flooding that has hit the neighborhood as well, both from an elevation standpoint and from a load standpoint, you know, the wall being hit by these larger waves of water. So it has been designed for both, with the exception of the one data point, the one outliering data point from Sandy.
And you said the former, IKEA and the former Fairways and all of the businesses that are located beyond the proposed gates already have resiliency measures up to 13 feet?
So new buildings. So IKEA was designed when it was built. Its first floor elevation is at elevation 13. All the Amazon warehouses that are going up now as part of the distribution centers in Red Hook are all also being developed and built at elevation 13 or higher.
And Fairway?
Fairway is an older building, and obviously it is not at elevation 13. Its current elevation is much lower than that. And so they, I believe, have their own panel system, or they did at some point have their own panel system for closing up the doors during a flood event. I do not know if they still do or not.
Okay. And Liz, how are people notified that the gates are going to close? If I've parked my car on the street for alternate side and I don't have to move it until next week, the gates close and then I can't move my car. So how do residents and others get notified that the gates are closing? And
I mean, we can provide details from emergency management, but at the Emergency Operations Center, or OEC, they will be holding the time clock. So when the National Weather Service says we're looking at 96 hours from 0 hour, which is maximum sustained winds of 39 miles per hour. We don't want staff or personnel out in high winds trying to close these doors. So they'll be holding the clock. They'll be counting down at, I can't remember when these gates will be deployed. I think you mentioned 72 hours. So at 72 hours, emergency management will tell DEP, Bureau of Coastal Resilience, have your gates closed by this certain amount of time. Now, as far as the notifications to the public, we have to get back to you on those specifics from emergency management. But again, that will be managed at the Operations Center, or OEC.
Okay, I'm just interested in that because there are a lot of cars, whether it's at the Fairways parking lot or just on the street. There's street parking, and then there's pier parking, which is beyond the gates. So I'm concerned about how those people will know the gates are going to close and their cars may be gone.
Yeah, I'll add that. So part of the flood protection system is not all walls. We are raising some of the streets.
Right.
And so some of that raising of the streets doesn't prevent those streets from being utilized during a flooding event. So you'll still be able to drive in or out of Red Hook. We're not closing off the neighborhood with the flood protection system. So you'll still be able to get your car out, I guess.
Even with the gates?
Correct. Because there are streets that have been, so the flood protection is at elevation 10, and there are actually streets that we've raised to elevation 10. Okay. So they'll still be continuous. So you'll still be able to drive in and out of Red Hook.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Osorio.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again so much for the presentation and for the details in your response to some of the questions that we've already raised. I really appreciate that. I have a couple questions. First, a clarification question, building on Commissioner Benjamin's question. So this is in Red Hook or New York? In other words, how does this compare to the Battery, basically?
This data is from the Battery.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the orange line is the historic high plus high tide?
So the orange line takes into account sea level rise. So you see there's a blue line on the screen. It shows a 10-year coastal storm at elevation 7. So that was our starting point. And then we've added to that sea level rise and also some freeboard, and that's how we get to elevation 10.
But so I guess I think you're saying, yes, Joe, you want to confirm, I understand. This is historic, this is the worst of the worst. In other words, the historic height plus what high tide would increase to that, like what happened with Sandy, right?
So every dot on that screen is a storm event.
The question is, storm events may happen during high tide or during low tide, and I want to understand if this is calculating or adding what high tide would bring to what otherwise is just a historical event.
So maybe I'm not saying it correctly. So the dots on the screen represent the highest point of a storm event that happened on any given day over the last 95 years.
I guess let me just explain what I want to understand. So when Sandy hit, the numbers that we have for the battery account for the height of the storm surge at that time, that day, plus high tide. Right, because we're including sort of like high tide. The level of the water at that point, or given the tidal cycle, the level of the water in the battery was different from other places in the city. So what I want to understand is if we are accounting here for the worst of the worst, given the fact that, you know, Red Hook had another flood level at that time, and we should be incorporating with the potential historic plus high tide.
I don't know how to better answer the question. So all the data here is being collected based on, so the tide gauge, the tide data that's collected is continuous, right? There's an ongoing gauge at the battery that's collecting data all the time. So data points, and then for every given day, NOAA then qualifies the high tide for that day and the low tide for that day, and twice a day, right? So there's 2 data points for every day. So during any of these storm events, the highest level of water that would have been recorded for that particular day. So during Sandy, 11.21 was the highest elevation of water recorded on, I remember what exact day that was, October 6th. In October 2012, that was on 11/21. That was the highest elevation of water recorded that day.
So we can say that at the battery, this number accounts for both. So like the amount of water that Sandy brought plus the regular high tide level.
Right.
Okay, cool. So you're saying the other thing is that according to your graphic, we're saying that Red Hook is going to be okay unless another Sandy happens at high tide.
I don't know what to say. The water, so you shouldn't clarify that the only way that Red Hook could flood or any place could flood could be high tide. It could flood at a tide lower than high tide, right? It just depends on the elevation of the water that the storm brings. At high tide, it would potentially be at the worst, but maybe that's not when the heaviest storm hits. So they don't necessarily always correlate.
No, fair enough. I understand that, but just can you clarify that? We're just hoping that there's not another Sandy here. Because it's a very unusual event.
Correct. Sandy was an incredibly unusual event, and we are not planning or protecting the neighborhood of Red Hook to another Sandy type event.
Thank you. That's clear. And then the other is with what level of within what span of time? In other words, what projections are you using to assume that?
So we have used so New York City has a low, medium, and high projections for sea level rise over various time frames through the 2050s, through the 2080s, and through the 2100s as part of the mayor's office's report a couple of years back. And so we use that data, and so we've looked at a 50-year time frame at the 90th percentile, so at the highest elevations, at the 50th.
But so in other words, help us understand where would the flood protection system sort of like, how far can it protect Red Hook under, let's say, the current projection for 2100 under that 90th percentile? In other words, according to the worst of the worst that we can possibly know right now, which is what the WRP requires us to do anyways, right? I think literally it says that we need to use the latest science from the New York City panel on climate change. So according to that, you know, where would the system, how far can the system get us?
The system is set for the 2080s at the highest percentile. Then if you go into the 2100s, it falls into the medium range percentile statistical
area.
So we're not basically anticipating, we're hoping that we don't get to the 2100 sort of like levels. Otherwise, we would be sort of like reducing a little bit the extent of the protection, right?
I don't think the word hope is appropriate. I don't think we're hoping for any of that. I think we're designing the highest level of protection that we could have within Red Hook based on the parameters that we had involved. And we then check that elevation versus the impacts to the neighborhood, the impacts to the waterfront, to the infrastructure, and then looked at what storms we could protect the neighborhood to based on all those features.
But so is it correct then to say that we're not protecting against the highest 2100 projections? We are with a lower level of under a low percentile, but that's not the best, that's not the highest level of protection, right?
That's correct, yeah. Okay. We're not protecting to a 500-year storm either, right? You could go higher. You can always go higher.
No, understood. Understood that you have to establish what is cost effective based on the probability of these storms. That's clear. I just want to make sure that the community gets a clear response when they're asking, what is the latest data that was used for this? And are we using what we should be? And so I think your response is clear in that we're using the latest data, but we're not designing for the worst case scenario. We're trying to anticipate the probability of the event with what we can based on the constraints. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay, thank you. So the other question that I have is the literature, says that when you're using this type of system, yes, you are attenuating both flooding and storm surge, as you explained, but the water is not disappearing. The water is going somewhere else. And so I want to understand, based on your modeling, what's going to happen in the Gowanus Canal or toward that. You're going up to Lorraine Street, but Bush at that side of the system is just 2 blocks away from Red Hook houses. And also we have Hamilton sort of like going in there, and then we have the Gowanus and all of the sort of like anticipated development that is supposed to happen there. How are we basically mitigating not the impact that the storm will have on that, because that's something else, you're protecting Red Hook, but the additional amount of water that you may be deviating in that direction with the flood protection system?
So I don't have all the modeling in front of me here, but I would sort of say to that question, we're talking about the Atlantic Ocean here. We're talking about a sort of an unlimited body of water. And so the amount of water that we are keeping out of Red Hook spread over the large area that we're talking about is not raising those impacts in any measurable way.
But, I respectfully would argue that literally you're accelerating the speed, the velocity of the water when it hits your barrier and moves in either direction. Mm-hmm. So in a way you are increasing the exposure of your nearby community to the water that otherwise would have hit you, no?
Again, I can double check with the modelers specifically, but no, that wasn't the understanding as we were putting this together.
Okay, yeah, I would just love to see what the result of it is. Maybe, you're sort of like decreasing that velocity enough for it to reduce the impact that it could have downstream. But I want to make sure that we understand what could be the unanticipated impact of this where we don't have this type of protection. Mm-hmm. The second question is, so I really appreciate the question that the chair asked about what is the difference between this and other places, and I was hoping you would have said that this is a heavy industrial area, and therefore we shouldn't just be thinking about the flooding impact or the storm surge impacts, but potential dislocation of chemicals that could actually dislodge. If, especially the buildings that you left out, which are some of them in an M3 heavy manufacturing area, could experience. And so I'm wondering if there's been any discussion about, and also we know that after Sandy, there was a significant amount of hazardous substances exposed. Some of them cleaned up by the time the city could do the inspection. Otherwise, literally the Sandy report says washed out by the storm. Given, again, the proximity of Red Hook houses to the industrial area here, I'm wondering if you explored at all sort of like what could potentially happen, or how to mitigate, rather, the potential dislodgement of hazardous substances in the event of this type of severe weather?
So no, we haven't looked at that in any detail. And are you mostly referring to the areas that are sort of to the east of IKEA and the areas over by Columbia Street and those kind of industrial spaces over there, by Gowanus over there? Yeah, no, that we did not explore what the potential impacts would be from that area continuing to flood, because we were not impacting those areas in any way. They are an existing condition that is remaining an existing condition.
Right, I understand that, and I agree, but the flood protection system shouldn't be just for flooding and a storm surge in an industrial area. We need to anticipate that, because that's the reality of an industrial neighborhood like this one, with residential uses so close to it. Also, just next to the Gowanus Canal, where we have a Superfund site that is in its process of being remediated, but we are anticipating major residential development. So I think that would be a missed opportunity if we couldn't figure out how this investment could respond to the specific needs of an industrial community like this one.
Yeah, it would seem that what you're discussing should be a separate project that's really more focused on the Gowanus Canal and the businesses that are very close to that area.
Yes, but I'm specifically referring to an M3 that you've intentionally left out within Red Hook.
But we didn't intentionally leave out any areas. We found the most equitable and efficient and affordable alignment that we could that protected the bulk of Red Hook.
Fair enough.
Okay.
No, fair enough. And I know that part of that decision making comes from an earlier assessment that looked at all the different variables, which I would love to. I mean, we brought it up in the review session, and I would love to just understand, what were the results of that research. But understood, you're working out of that. It's just, I think, an important, because what are the people who live there supposed to do? And also, these are private properties, but they're not receiving the same level of protection that properties across the street are. So what is the public benefit? I mean, we have to sort of like balance the public benefit of this type of investment. Because if I'm an industrial, developer inside your coastal protection system, I'm better off than somebody who is outside and didn't get any. Make sense?
Sure.
One last question, if I can. So I also was very thankful for the question about what's going to happen when we deploy them, and so I'm just wondering. I know that since Sandy, there's been significant discussions around how to incorporate local labor in terms of using these types of infrastructure investments to generate economic development, and so I'm wondering how much of this could actually be built in New York, whether you anticipate that there's perhaps a new industry sector along the lines of what the EDC is announcing in terms of potential green jobs that can happen. Where are we in that regard? Is your system designed to cater to local providers? Is it impossible? Or will we be importing all of this? Can you give us a sense of, to what extent we can incorporate people, and not for nothing, people from the Red Hook houses as well, who have been promised back since Sandy, actually, that some type of job could actually come, with the level of infrastructure rebuilding that has happened.
We can definitely follow up with the specifics, but DDC does work to, involve local labor. There are some initiatives and programs that we utilize to, again, address those interests that you mentioned. So I can definitely follow up and get back to you on those specifics.
Yes, thank you. I would appreciate it, but just out of curiosity, is there sort of like an intention to hire local labor for?
I know definitely during construction, but as far as what you're talking about, as far as the implementability, we could definitely work with DEP also on that. They will be the managing agency that would be working on the deployment.
Okay, yes.
They would have teams that would be working on these projects throughout the year for maintenance and inspection, and then for deployment. But I believe they would also have programs and initiatives, perhaps, that would address that concern or interest.
Thank you. That's great. So just to make sure I understand, not in the construction, like the core construction of the infrastructure, but yes, in terms of deploying the floodgates and so forth, maintaining them and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let me go to Commissioner Marin.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the presentation. I had concerns about street raising, and most of them have been answered through Commissioner Benjamin's queries. But I'm still wondering, what happens, you're raising streets. So what happens to the adjacent properties, their entrances, how they get into their properties? Can you talk to that a little bit, please?
Sure. Yeah, we've worked all that out through design. So even though we're raising streets, we potentially will be regrading driveways. We'll be making sure that at no point will there be any loss of access to an adjacent property from a raised street or sidewalk.
Correct. But now that you've raised the street, you've actually created sort of a pool for that homeowner because the water now is going to go into a property. So and I understand the floodgates are meant to mitigate water coming in, but there may be some water that comes in. So how does that affect the adjacent homeowners, and what considerations have been made for that?
So typically the way the city's graded is that from the back of building, at the back of sidewalk, that's the high point. And then you go from that point to the curb line, which is the low point, right? And then the middle of the roadway is the crown or the high point of the roadway, and that comes back to the curb as well, right? So the curb becomes the gutter line. Nothing's changed in the way we've designed this project. So if we have raised the roadway, we've also raised the gutter line, and we've also raised the back of sidewalk. We are not pushing any water back into any of the properties that would have not already been designed that way.
So now an entrance that may have been at 0 datum becomes a negative datum. Is that correct? I see someone shaking his head no. So
yeah, there's no entrance. What do you mean by an entrance?
Someone coming into their property, into their front door, into their driveway,
right,
into the first floor of their property.
So I don't know of any properties right now where the front door of anyone's property is level with the back of sidewalk. Everyone is on a stoop or a stair, or there's some sort of movement upwards to get into the first floor of a home.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Rampersad.
Yes, thank you. A lot of the questions I was thinking about were asked by my colleagues. I just had two quick questions. With regards to FDNY access, God forbid the gates are up, do they have direct access where they can lower the gate? God forbid of emergency. I know it's coordinated, I guess, with OEM, but I'm just curious.
Yeah.
What happens in that scenario?
I think that would probably be managed on a case-by-case basis, but I just also want to remind folks that these flood protection measures in relation to the grade are a matter of maybe 2, 3, and sometimes 4 feet, as opposed to maybe some of the other resiliency measures that you've seen around the city where they look, sometimes 8, 9, 10 feet above grade. So as far as accessibility, even if the gates were not open, you could imagine a scenario where the fire department would be able to traverse those or go over those and provide access. So noted about the access issues, but we can, work with emergency management. After a flood event, there is a definite reopening protocol. That's, once the all clear signal is given, there is a reopening emergency response for that as well.
That was going to lead me to my next question. What happens after the storm? Is it, does a DEP team go with OEM to each location and say, okay, this is satisfactory, we can lower the gate?
Yeah, there's a whole host of operations outlined in the emergency response plan. It would be DEP, likely it's their asset, so they would want to, do an assessment of the asset. Is it safe to reopen? DDC even has an emergency cleanup contract that we engage after an event as well. So Parks Department would be notified, are there any trees or anything notable that we would want to clear out to provide that access back to the site.
And my last question, during the course of a year, how often is the system monitored and maintained?
What's up? Yeah, so the emergency response plan, we'll look at that. And so the overall system per FEMA's regulations has to be inspected every 5 years. And then the emergency response plan, which I don't have the details in front of me, unfortunately, right now, would indicate exactly how often within the yearly period that they actually have to go out.
It would be good to know, because when things are mechanical, they often tend to break. And understood. God forbid, I know you say it's 72 hours, but just in case, maybe there's a part that's not available. I don't know. I'm just, this is the city of New York. Things happen like that here.
Sure.
So just curious if you can get back
We can
to us
do
on
that,
that.
yeah.
I appreciate it.
Just a reminder, in case any part of the mechanical system does fail, the gates can be moved manually. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Gold?
Thank you. The presentation was certainly comprehensive. Just one question I'm sort of left with, and particularly looking at this chart of the design flood elevation. So if we think about the gates that give us the extra 2 feet, if I have it correct, right? So the flood wall is 8 feet, and then the gates give us the extra 2 to get to 10, thereabouts.
No, the gates are mostly at 10 feet, and the gate and the wall is at 10 feet as well. So they close the system. You get the full.
Got it. And so when the gates are down and not used, is that a full 10-foot drop?
It is not. The highest the walls ever get is about 4.5 or so feet from the sidewalk elevation.
Got it. So, sorry. So, and then just thinking about that, following up on the prior question, is thinking about how do we think about the trigger for activating those gates?
Again, that has to go back to a question for EM. So we'll have to figure out exactly what they're monitoring and understand exactly what data they use to trigger the deployment.
Do we have a sense, and I know the chart is, obviously very telling, right? I mean, if we look between the 7-foot line history and then we look to 11, there've just been, a small handful of incidents to date. Obviously, we can argue things are getting worse. Do we have a sense for how often or how many times over the next, 10 years we think the gates may need to be deployed?
I do not, unfortunately.
Got it. Okay. If there is some data on that, that might be helpful. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Commissioner Kamani?
Thank you. Just one quick question. I also just want to commend you on the graphics. I think they're really excellent. And so thank you for that. Given all the post-Sandy construction that's gone on at Red Hook houses and a lot of the delays and sometimes the notifications are there for residents, sometimes they're not, and I know residents get really frustrated by all of the construction going on and how long it's taken and that they don't know what's going on. What are you proposing in terms of how to communicate progress?
So during construction, DDC has a very robust community engagement program. We have community construction liaisons, or CCLs, and they schedule routine update meetings at local establishments, community boards, community centers, where we provide a 2-week look ahead about the construction activities that we work on our projects. We also reach out to other projects that are also in construction in the area, just to check in, see how everyone's doing. Are we going to compound things, make things worse or better? So we do, again, have a robust construction community liaison program. So rest assured that we will be engaging that fully in the neighborhood.
I just want to say that's wonderful to hear, and perhaps, I don't know if it's possible, in coordinating with NYCHA, that NYCHA's schedule, perhaps your liaison can also provide that NYCHA information to NYCHA residents as part of the comprehensive. If that's happening every so often anyway, there aren't construction liaisons at NYCHA, and it would be great for residents to hear about all the construction in one place at one time.
Do our best to reach out. Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, I have a follow-up from Commissioner Osorio.
Thank you, Chair. And I will be very quick. Thank you so much for addressing all of our questions. Just one really small thing that I wanted to ask. Given that the system is primarily a hard infrastructure system, what are the opportunities for nature-based solutions or at least green infrastructure, particularly at the park, right? Because it's right sort of like in front of your barrier. Can we reabsorb water there? What have you thought in that regard?
So there is green infrastructure proposed as part of the project on the interior of the flood protection system. So we have incorporated that, working with DEP to get that approved, but the intent is that there will be bioswales or their version of bioswales or permeable pavers or some sort of green infrastructure within the interior to handle cloudbursts and other sort of rainfall events. Exterior to the wall along the shore and the waterfront, we are not including any sort of nature-based or green infrastructure solutions at this time.
Thanks for that. It would be great if we can get some of the designs for the interior. I didn't get that. I would love to see them. But also just outside. Again, this is a major amenity, neighborhood amenity that we're talking about, and it will be a missed opportunity if there's nothing we can do to prepare the park or to activate the park, as the city has done in other places, to absorb some of the water or at least retain it. Because my fear is it's going to go somewhere else. Thanks.
Understood. Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much. We appreciate it, and I see no more questions for you all from the Commission, so we appreciate your time today. Thank you. And I also will note that I do not see members of the public wishing to testify on this item. So we will close the hearing on calendar numbers 9 and 10, Red Hook Coastal Resiliency, with appreciation to all of you for all of your work on this. We recognize it's a very important one, so thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, let's talk about what's next.
For Brooklyn, calendar number 11, 853rd Avenue DOF Site Selection and Acquisition, CD7C240090PCK, continued public hearing. And the matter of an application for a site selection and acquisition concerning 853rd Avenue Department of Finance Site Selection and Acquisition. Any members of the public here to testify on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on calendar 11. Let's move on to the next. For Manhattan, calendar number 12, Times Square Major Concession, CD5C240088MCM, continued public hearing, in the matter of an application for a major concession concerning Times Square Major Concession. Great. Any members of the public here today seeking to testify on calendar 12, Times Square? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on this item as well. Do we have any more business before the Commission today, Madam Secretary? No, Chair Garadnik. There is no other business before the Commission, but I do have some public information to share. For those of you who are unable to or did not wish to testify, you can submit written testimony online by selecting this hearing on the upcoming meetings page of the NYC Engage portal, through DCP's website, or by mailing your comments to City Planning Commission Calendar Information Office, 120 Broadway, 31st floor, New York, 10271. Great, and with appreciation to the members of the Commission and certainly members of public applicant teams that were present here today, we are now adjourned. The time is 11:13. Thank you.